If you want to accelerate your learning curve as a documentary filmmaker, you need to focus your time, energy, attention, and money on the right things. Not hype, not fads, not influencer trends. So to help you wade through the bad advice, in this video, I'm going to share 7 pieces of filmmaking hype that you should ignore to save you time and save you money. For each of the 7, I'll share where the hype is coming from, why it doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does, and where to focus your attention instead. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer, and on this channel, I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. The first thing that I encourage you to ignore is camera resolution. You know, the specs that you are constantly being bombarded by every time a new camera drops, the 4K, the 6K, the 8K, ignore it. You see, there's a common misconception that the higher the resolution, the better the camera, and it's just not true. But let's back up. What is resolution? Well, when it comes to cameras, digital cameras, the resolution refers to the number of pixels a camera sensor has. HD resolution contains 1920 horizontal pixels and 1080 vertical pixels. For 4K, there are 3840 horizontal pixels and 2160 vertical ones. So why shouldn't you concern yourself with the resolution of cameras that seem to be going up and up by the minute? Well, a few reasons. First, no one can tell the difference. There comes a point when a camera's resolution reaches a threshold where the human eye can't perceive any more detail, even in a movie theater setting. In fact, there are certain circumstances where high resolution actually decreases how true the image is to life. It's just too sharp. That's why nowadays you see the same filmmakers who are touting 8K also throwing mist filters and vintage lenses on their cameras because the cameras are so sharp that they don't look natural. The second reason why you shouldn't worry about this is because more than likely your film isn't going to have a huge run on IMAX. Now feel free to come hit me up in the comments if I end up being wrong on that one, but more than likely you are aiming for your film to maybe be in theaters, on streaming platforms, or just here on YouTube. At theaters, there are only 2 resolutions used for digital projection, 2K and 4K. Most are 2K. So anything shot above that gets scaled down to 2K. Which again, the visual difference between 2K and 1080 is practically imperceptible. Most of TV is in 1080. Netflix does require its films to be shot in 4K, but even the lowest end cameras have that option these days. And then here on YouTube, resolution matters even less. The video you are currently watching was shot in HD, and then the final export was in 4K, so that the little 4K option appears on YouTube, but honestly, that's just my vanity. It literally makes no difference. Even the National Geographic show Trafficked is shot on a Sony f5, which came out in 2012 and only shoots 1080 HD natively. You know where increased resolution does make a difference, causing you more problems. It will slow your editing workflow, make storage more expensive, and lead to longer rendering times. And while we're on the topic of crushing camera specs, let's roll right into the second piece of hype that you can ignore, dynamic range. Similar to resolution, a lot of us get caught up in the race for cameras with the highest dynamic range, assuming that the more stops of dynamic range, the better the image quality. And while it's true that a higher dynamic range can help retain more detail in the highlights and shadows, again, it's a diminishing return. Once you're beyond 12 to 14 stops, the differences are usually subtle, especially when viewed on common screens like phones, tablets, and standard TVs. Honestly, nowadays the cameras out there are so good that even the cameras made for vloggers have as much dynamic range as the most popular Sundance documentary cameras over the past 5 years, such as the Canon C300 Mark II. So instead of worrying about one stop of range here or there, here's what I would focus on first. Learn how to shoot in log. Shooting in log was really intimidating for me for a number of years, so I just didn't go there. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to add post-production time, color grading. But once I dove in and started to apply myself to learning log, it became much easier than I ever anticipated. With monitor LUTs that I can use while filming and editing LUTs I can use while grading in post-production, it can be very simple. So if you want to get the most out of colors, shadows, and highlights, don't worry about the dynamic range numbers getting thrown at you. Learn your log workflow. Learn how to light an interview and how to shape the natural light around you. That will take your images much further than any camera marketing video would like you to believe. The third bit of hype that I would encourage you to not only ignore, but to start actually pushing against is the pervasive belief that every camera movement needs to be as smooth as vegan butter. With gimbals, stabilizers, and sliders getting cheaper and cheaper, it feels like everyone is equating a cinematic look with a smooth look. No jitters, no shake, and oh man, have I been there. I remember when I got the FX6, which doesn't have built-in stabilization. I was legitimately insecure about it, which is almost embarrassing to say because now I imagine documentarians of the past with their massive film cameras just shaking their head at how spoiled I am. But I was insecure about the shakiness. The more and more I've grown as a filmmaker, I've realized that, especially in the world of documentaries, smoothness is not the goal. In fact, overly smooth shots can feel sterile or detached, losing the raw, authentic quality that defines great documentaries. Many powerful films benefit from handheld movements that convey urgency, intimacy, and proximity to the subject matter. A little shake or jitter can enhance the emotion of a scene, making the audience feel like they're right there in the middle of the action. This doesn't mean you should never use stabilization. It means using it intentionally. Know when a gimbal or Steadicam is right for the shot, and when it's better to go handheld or even use the natural movement of your body to add to the story. If you're constantly worried about how smooth your footage is, you might miss the real moments that make your film unique. Focus on capturing authenticity and don't be afraid to let your footage have a bit of character. It's like being able to see the brushstrokes on a painting that lets you know there is someone behind a work of art. Don't be afraid to show your brushstrokes. And the last piece of gear-related hype that I think you should ignore is the constant cycle of new drones. I'm going to keep this one quick. Drones come out constantly. If you already have one, it's more than likely good enough. Just enjoy using it for the next 5 years. If you don't have a drone yet, think critically about whether your story actually needs one. With everyone having drones nowadays, aerial footage can very easily feel like a gimmick or a crutch rather than an enhancement. So think critically before you use one. And if you do, please do so sparingly when it's motivated. All right, let's jump out of Gear Corner for a bit and talk about some other things you should ignore as a documentary filmmaker. The first being a saying, a quote, a cliche, which I think is bad advice. And that is that documentaries are made in the edit. And it's not just me who thinks this is bad advice, but also the Oscar-nominated director Matthew Heineman, who said this on Roger Deakins' podcast.
I think the sort of cliche thing that people say is that, like, docs are made in the edit room and narrative films are made in the script.
Oh, that's not true.
Which I don't think is remotely true at all. But a lot of people say that. I just think it couldn't be farther from the truth.
The made in the edit saying implies that no matter how chaotic or underwhelming the shoot was, you can always fix it in post. Now, I know where this saying comes from. I understand its origins, but I just want to caution you against this because I think it is a big mistake that filmmakers make, which is to show up somewhere with the seed of an idea, film a ton of footage, and then just try to figure out the story in the edit. And especially when you are early in your career, I think that's a fast track to getting discouraged and burnt out as you sift through endless footage that lacks cohesion and a vision. If you don't have the right footage, no amount of editing will turn what you have into a compelling film. Successful documentaries are built on a foundation of careful planning, thorough research, and being prepared to capture key moments as they unfold. Editing can certainly shape and refine a story, but it can't invent it. So focus your efforts on understanding your characters, subject matter, anticipating pivotal moments, and building a strong narrative arc before and while you're in the field. Moving on to the sixth thing you should ignore. Let's talk about awards. If you are early in your career, and I consider myself in that category, being just 10 years into this, I think that for the most part, awards are a costly distraction. Submitting to festivals and competitions can be expensive, time-consuming, and unfortunately, they usually don't translate to future work or career growth. Too often, people get fixated on awards because of vanity, because of ego, Because in this challenging and sometimes lonely world of filmmaking, it can feel so amazing to have someone, anyone, acknowledge you and validate what you've created. It's so easy to get caught up thinking that if I win these awards, then it means I'm successful. But that's not the case. If you want longevity in this business, focus on making new work, growing with each project, do it for many years, and then maybe the awards and opportunities will come as a consequence. So instead of fixating on awards and festivals, I encourage you to prioritize grants, fellowships, or funds that directly support new projects. Focus on building a body of work that demonstrates your unique voice and vision. Don't chase validation from external sources. Instead, concentrate on telling more stories that matter to you and finding ways to get those stories in front of audiences. And finally, on that theme of external validation, it's time to ignore the opinions of others. Honestly, one of the things that breaks my heart more than anything is seeing someone navigate their life based on someone else's opinion. You have one life. You've got one shot at this. And you're not going to try to be a filmmaker because your dad says you should get a real job. You're not going to turn your camera on, not going to take that creative risk, not going to make your dream project because some random person on social media says you suck. Listen, if you're sitting there right now and you're not living a life that you're happy about, if you're not creating the kinds of stories you want to create, more than likely it's because you're scared. You're scared of someone judging you, whether that's your family's judgment or your friends or the industry or what society says is successful. It's time to ignore it all. It's time to get quiet in your own head and to live and create on your own terms without fearing what others will say. That's it for this week. I'll see you back here next week where we will flip the script on today's video. Instead of talking about what is overhyped, we'll talk about the underrated, the underhyped, the things no one is discussing, but that you should be thinking a lot more about. Until then, go out and tell some stories.